What if one of America's greatest archaeological mysteries wasn't hidden beneath the desert, but inside the walls of the Grand Canyon itself? For more than a century, a single newspaper article has fueled one of the most controversial stories ever connected to the canyon. It described an explorer who claimed to have discovered a vast underground complex carved deep into the rock. Inside were carefully planned corridors, sealed storage chambers, copper tools, strange inscribed tablets, statues unlike anything expected in North America, and preserved human remains. Yet today, none of those reported discoveries can be examined. No confirmed artifacts are on public display. No verified photographs have surfaced. No official expedition records matching the account have ever been produced. All that remains is the original report, the endless debate surrounding it, and one unsettling question. Did an explorer really uncover evidence of a forgotten civilization hidden inside the Grand Canyon? Or has one of history's strangest discoveries been buried by time itself? To understand why this mystery refuses to disappear, we have to go back to the beginning. At the start of the 20th century, much of the Grand Canyon remained remarkably isolated. While the canyon had already become known for its breathtaking landscapes, enormous areas beyond the most accessible routes were still rarely visited. Steep cliffs, winding side canyons, unstable rock, and the powerful Colorado River made exploration slow, dangerous, and unpredictable. Among the men traveling through this unforgiving landscape was an explorer named Kinkaid. According to the newspaper account published in 1909, Kinkaid had spent months navigating the Colorado River while documenting the terrain. His work required him to observe the canyon from the water rather than from the rim, giving him a completely different perspective on the towering cliffs that surrounded him. During one stretch of the journey, something unusual caught his attention. High above the river, sunlight reflected differently from one section of the canyon wall. Instead of blending naturally with the surrounding rock, one area appeared unusually smooth. From below, it looked almost as though part of the cliff had been deliberately shaped rather than formed entirely by nature. Most travelers would have continued downstream. Kinkaid didn't. Curiosity convinced him that the feature deserved a closer look. He secured his boat along the riverbank and began climbing toward the strange opening. It was an exhausting ascent. The newspaper estimated that the entrance stood roughly 1,400 feet above the Colorado River. Reaching it meant navigating unstable rock faces, narrow ledges, and steep slopes where even a small mistake could have had fatal consequences. Unlike modern climbers, Kinkaid had none of today's equipment. Every step required caution, patience, and determination. Hours later, after slowly working his way up the canyon wall, he finally arrived at the opening. And according to the published account, the first thing he noticed wasn't the cave itself. It was the entrance. The article claimed that iron had been incorporated directly into the opening. That detail immediately separated this discovery from an ordinary cave. Natural caves are created by geological processes. They require no explanation beyond erosion, water, and time. But worked iron suggests something entirely different. It suggests human planning. Someone would have had to transport the material to an almost inaccessible location. Someone would have had to install it. And someone clearly believed the entrance needed reinforcement. Whether that reinforcement was intended to protect whatever lay inside, or to prevent access from the outside, was impossible to determine. But according to the report, the entrance did not appear accidental. It appeared intentional. After examining the opening, Kinkaid lit his lantern and stepped inside. He expected a small cave. Instead, he found a passage extending far beyond the entrance. The corridor stretched deep into the canyon wall. The floor remained relatively level, making it surprisingly easy to walk. The ceiling was high enough for a person to move comfortably, and the dry air inside suggested the interior had remained sealed from the outside environment for a very long time. As he continued deeper, additional passages began appearing. These side chambers didn't seem randomly scattered as many natural cave systems are. Instead, they appeared at regular intervals along the main corridor. The deeper Kinkaid traveled, the less the place resembled a naturally formed cave. Straight sections connected one chamber to another. Corners met at deliberate angles. Rooms seemed positioned with purpose, almost as though the entire complex had been carefully planned before anyone ever began carving into the rock. For someone whose job involved surveying natural landscapes, the discovery must have been astonishing. Instead of mapping geology, he now appeared to be walking through something that looked remarkably similar to underground architecture. Eventually, he entered larger rooms branching off from the main passage. Some were empty. Others reportedly contained objects that immediately suggested the complex had once been occupied. Large storage jars stood against the walls. According to the newspaper account, some remained sealed while others had broken over time. Inside several of them were what appeared to be preserved remnants of grain, protected by the canyon's dry climate. If that observation was accurate, it carried important implications. Food storage is rarely associated with temporary shelters. People generally store significant supplies only when they expect to remain somewhere for extended periods. As Kinkaid continued exploring, he reportedly encountered another surprising category of artifacts: copper objects. The article described blades, tools, and other worked implements fashioned from copper. Their exact purpose wasn't always clear, but their presence immediately raised new questions. Who had made them? How old were they? And why were they hidden inside an underground complex carved high into the walls of the Grand Canyon? The discoveries became even more intriguing. According to the report, Kinkaid also found thin metal tablets bearing unfamiliar symbols. He couldn't identify the writing, nor could he compare it to any script known to him. Unfortunately, the newspaper included no drawings of the inscriptions. No confirmed photographs have ever surfaced. As a result, the reported tablets remain one of the most debated aspects of the entire story. If genuine, they would represent more than isolated artifacts. Writing suggests organization. It implies communication, record-keeping, and a society capable of preserving information across generations. That possibility transformed the discovery from an unusual cave into something potentially much larger. By now, Kinkaid reportedly realized the site required far more expertise than he alone could provide. What he had seen during this initial exploration seemed too significant to ignore. According to the newspaper account, he left the canyon and reported the discovery, believing specialists should examine the underground complex in greater detail. That decision would change the story forever, because what investigators were later said to have found inside the deepest chambers would make the mystery even more controversial, and would eventually become the reason people are still debating this remarkable story more than a century later. Kinkaid's initial exploration had already challenged everything he expected to find inside the Grand Canyon. The underground passages showed signs of planning rather than chance. The storage vessels hinted that people may have occupied the site for extended periods. Copper tools and inscribed metal tablets raised questions that one explorer alone couldn't answer. But according to the 1909 newspaper report, the most remarkable discoveries still lay deeper inside the mountain. As Kinkaid continued through the complex, the passages reportedly became larger and more elaborate. The narrow corridors gradually opened into spacious chambers that appeared to serve different purposes. Instead of resembling isolated caves, the rooms seemed connected as parts of a much larger design. Some areas appeared practical, while others looked ceremonial or communal. The newspaper described one central chamber as especially impressive. According to the account, it was large enough to accommodate hundreds of people. Unlike the smaller rooms near the entrance, this chamber featured a carefully leveled floor and numerous alcoves carved directly into the surrounding walls. What stood inside those alcoves became one of the most controversial parts of the entire story. The report claimed that several carved figures had been placed throughout the chamber. These were not rough carvings made directly into the rock. Instead, they were described as statues positioned deliberately around the room. One larger figure reportedly occupied a central position while smaller figures surrounded it in an organized arrangement. Almost immediately, comparisons began appearing. Some readers believed the statues resembled imagery associated with Buddhist traditions. Others thought they shared characteristics with Hindu iconography. Many historians, however, argued that such comparisons reflected the newspaper writer's own interpretation rather than an objective description of the objects themselves. Regardless of which explanation was correct, one point remained the same. If the report accurately described the statues, their appearance did not fit comfortably with what researchers expected to find inside the Grand Canyon. The mystery was growing with every room Kinkaid explored. Architecture, storage facilities, copper artifacts, inscribed tablets, and now statues unlike anything anticipated in that region. Individually, each discovery might invite debate. Together, they painted the picture of something much more significant than an ordinary cave. But the exploration was not over. According to the article, Kinkaid eventually reached chambers that appeared different from everything he had seen before. These rooms contained no supplies, no tools, no storage vessels. Instead, they held something that changed the atmosphere of the expedition entirely. Human remains. The newspaper did not describe skeletons scattered randomly across the floor. Instead, it claimed the bodies had been placed carefully inside specially prepared chambers. The dry conditions deep inside the canyon reportedly preserved them naturally, allowing many physical features to survive long after death. Whether this description was accurate has never been independently verified. No confirmed photographs exist. No documented scientific examination has ever been released. Everything depends entirely upon what the newspaper claimed had been discovered. Even so, the report dramatically shifted the story. An underground complex containing preserved human remains would represent far more than an unusual archaeological site. It would suggest that the location had once served as an important place for the people who built and used it. The report also described additional chambers extending beyond those first discoveries. Long hallways continued deeper into the rock, suggesting that the complex might have stretched much farther than Kinkaid was able to explore during his initial visit. Rather than documenting every room, he reportedly focused on observing the site's most significant features before leaving to notify others. According to the newspaper, he believed specialists should examine the location with proper equipment and additional personnel. If true, that decision would soon bring another major institution into the story, the Smithsonian Institution. The article claimed Kinkaid reported his discovery and that enough interest existed for a follow-up investigation to be organized under the direction of a man identified as Professor S. A. Jordan. Exactly who this individual was has remained one of the greatest controversies surrounding the case. Researchers have spent decades searching for evidence confirming his role. Some have suggested the newspaper may have recorded the name incorrectly. Others believe the individual never existed as described. Whatever the explanation, the article treated the follow-up expedition as a normal continuation of Kinkaid's discovery rather than an extraordinary claim requiring sensational treatment. That detail is important. The newspaper did not present the story as folklore or speculation. Instead, it described a process familiar to scientific exploration. An explorer makes a discovery. Experts are notified. Additional investigators arrive. The site is examined more thoroughly. At least that is how the story was presented. If such an expedition truly took place, historians would normally expect an enormous amount of documentation. Scientific expeditions generate records. Artifacts are cataloged. Photographs are taken. Reports are written. Correspondence is preserved. Museums maintain inventories. Even unsuccessful investigations typically leave behind a substantial paper trail. Yet this is where the mystery takes an unexpected turn. Researchers looking for official documentation connected to the reported discovery have consistently encountered the same problem. Very little can be verified beyond the original newspaper article itself. No confirmed catalog of the reported artifacts has been found. No verified Smithsonian expedition records matching the story have been publicly identified. No authenticated photographs from inside the reported complex have surfaced. Over time, the absence of evidence became almost as famous as the discovery itself. Some historians view this as strong evidence that the story was fictional from the beginning. Others argue that missing documentation alone cannot conclusively prove the events never happened. Archives are incomplete. Records are occasionally lost. Names can be recorded incorrectly. Documents sometimes disappear through administrative changes, disasters, or simple human error. Those possibilities exist in many historical investigations. The challenge is determining which explanation best fits this particular case. As years passed, the debate expanded beyond archaeology. The question was no longer simply whether Kinkaid found an underground complex. People also began asking why nearly every piece of supporting evidence described in the newspaper appeared to have vanished. That question transformed an unusual newspaper story into one of America's longest-running historical mysteries. And as researchers searched for answers in official archives, others began looking somewhere entirely different. They turned toward the traditions that had existed long before the newspaper article was ever written. Stories passed down for generations by the indigenous peoples of the Southwest. Because some of those traditions described hidden places beneath the canyon long before anyone had ever heard of the so-called Iron Door. By the time the newspaper story reached the public, the reported discovery had all the ingredients of a landmark archaeological find. If an artificial underground complex truly existed inside the Grand Canyon, complete with carefully planned chambers, copper artifacts, inscribed tablets, statues, and preserved human remains, historians would normally expect decades of research to follow. Instead, the story seemed to move in the opposite direction. According to later researchers, attempts to locate official records connected with the alleged expedition produced almost nothing. No verified collection of the reported artifacts became publicly available. No confirmed photographs of the underground chambers emerged. No widely accepted documentation describing a full scientific investigation ever appeared. The lack of evidence eventually became just as famous as the discovery itself. For many historians, this was enough to dismiss the story entirely. From that perspective, the explanation is straightforward. Extraordinary discoveries require extraordinary evidence. Since no physical evidence has been verified, the simplest conclusion is that the newspaper account was either exaggerated or completely fictional. But others argue that the situation is not quite so simple. They point out that missing documentation does not automatically prove an event never occurred. Historical archives are incomplete. Records have been lost through fires, floods, administrative mistakes, and the passage of time. Expeditions have occasionally been documented under incorrect names, and newspaper reports have sometimes contained errors that later complicated historical research. None of those possibilities prove that Kinkaid's discovery happened. But they also prevent historians from closing the case as neatly as many would like. Another factor has helped keep the mystery alive: the geography itself. The Grand Canyon is far larger and more complex than most visitors realize. Millions of people experience the canyon from overlooks near the rim, but only a tiny percentage ever enter its remote interior. Vast cliff systems, narrow side canyons, hidden ledges, and thousands of natural caves remain scattered throughout the landscape. In many places, reaching these locations requires technical climbing, river access, or special permits. Some areas remain so difficult to access that relatively few people visit them even today. Because of that, the idea that undiscovered caves could exist inside the canyon is not controversial. Large cave systems are already known to occur within the canyon's limestone formations. The real question has never been whether hidden spaces exist. It is whether one of those spaces could contain the kind of archaeological site described in the 1909 article. That question remains unanswered. As researchers debated the historical evidence, others noticed another intriguing detail. Long before the newspaper story appeared, indigenous traditions from the Southwest already included stories about underground places beneath the region. These traditions vary among different communities and should not be treated as identical accounts. However, many describe hidden places associated with earlier peoples, ancestral worlds, or locations connected to important cultural memories. Some traditions also describe certain entrances as places that should remain undisturbed. The original newspaper article never claimed to prove these stories. Likewise, the traditions themselves do not describe Kinkaid's reported discovery. Still, the similarities encouraged many people to compare the two. Could the explorer have stumbled upon a place remembered in oral tradition? Or was the resemblance simply coincidence? No evidence has established a direct connection. Even so, the comparison has become one of the reasons the mystery continues to fascinate both researchers and the public. Perhaps the most memorable feature of the entire story is the entrance itself. According to the newspaper, iron had been incorporated into the opening high above the Colorado River. Whether that description was completely accurate has never been confirmed. Yet it raises an interesting question. Why reinforce the entrance to a cave? Natural caves don't require doors. A reinforced entrance suggests purpose. It suggests that someone intentionally modified the site. Of course, if the newspaper account was fictional, then the iron entrance may never have existed at all. But if the report reflected an actual observation, it becomes one of the most puzzling details in the entire story. Who built it? When was it built? And why choose such a remote location? More than a century later, no definitive answers exist. That uncertainty explains why the mystery has survived for so long. Unlike many historical legends, the Grand Canyon story never reached a clear conclusion. No expedition conclusively proved the discovery. No investigation conclusively disproved every aspect of it either. Instead, the story settled into a gray area between documented history and enduring legend. Today, most professional archaeologists remain highly skeptical of the newspaper's claims, largely because no verified physical evidence supports them. At the same time, the original article continues to circulate, inviting each new generation to ask the same questions that readers asked in 1909. Was it an elaborate piece of journalism? A misunderstood report that grew larger over time? Or the account of a discovery that somehow slipped beyond history's reach? The truth may never be known. What is certain is that the Grand Canyon remains one of the few places on Earth vast enough to inspire mysteries on this scale. Its immense cliffs still conceal countless caves. Its remote landscapes still challenge explorers. And its history continues to blur the line between documented fact and enduring legend. Perhaps that is the real reason the story refuses to disappear. Not because it has been proven. Not because it has been disproven, but because it occupies the narrow space where history, folklore, archaeology, and human curiosity all meet. Whether Kinkaid uncovered the entrance to a forgotten underground complex or simply became part of one of America's greatest historical legends, his story continues to remind us that some mysteries survive not because they have answers, but because the questions are too compelling to stop asking. And somewhere within the vast walls of the Grand Canyon, countless unexplored caves still wait in silence. Whether they hide only stone or something far more remarkable, remains one of the canyon's greatest unanswered questions.